And we are live here to chat about not just in general, what we watched this week, but actually one specific episode that we watched this week. We're here to chat about part 1 of Armageddon, and you'll notice that I am joined by a familiar face that is not Kate. Carey, say hi.
Hey guys, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. However, I will say I've taken a few steps back in time, being back in the CW Arrowverse for a crossover. It has been a while, and while I have unfortunately kept up with everything along, fortunately or unfortunately, we love to hate it, right? I've kept up with everything along the way. I know a lot of people are joining for this crossover that haven't actually been keeping up with Arrowverse at all. You're not one of them. What have you been keeping up with?
Strangely enough, I've kept up with everything but The Flash.
Okay.
And I say that, but I haven't watched The Flash in the last couple of years, but I've been sort of keeping up with it through like articles and that sort of thing. I just haven't watched it.
Okay. There's nothing strange about not keeping up with the Flash. What is strange is keeping up with the Flash. That's what's inexcusable. So you watched like Supergirl and Black Lightning through their end. You watched Legends of Tomorrow and Batwoman.
Yes, indeed.
And you also
and
watched
Stargirl as
Stargirl,
well.
right? Yeah.
I do. One of my
Stargirl
favorites,
is one that would be fun to see crossover.
And don't forget Superman and Lois.
How can I forget the actual best show on the lineup? Superman.
Thank you.
Well, I'll put Superman and Lois and Batwoman on a good week and Black Lightning all up there as like top tier of this sort of like second wave CW DC Arrowverse.
Stargirl had a really good season too, also.
They did. They did. I've kind of enjoyed the Stargirl thus far, their focus on their audience. It's very unwavering. I very rarely notice them sort of like deviating to sort of pander to, like in my case, an older audience or to, people who may be watching the CW and then are suddenly watching the online version. They really stick pretty true to themselves. And I wonder if that's why she hasn't crossed over in crossovers like the one we're discussing tonight.
Right.
Well, Kate is in a land far, far away, trying to escape anything that has to do with the, CW show we call The Flash. But she did leave a note for you specifically, Carey, which I will pull up, a baton for you to carry, if you will.
Uh-oh.
She first says hello. And she asks that you fill her role of the good-humored eye rolling if I delve into talking about reality TV.
I got you covered, Kate.
Thank you very much, Kate. And we will do our best to avoid all discussion of reality television and instead talk about something that's much higher quality, which is the Flash crossover Armageddon. Now, normally I would pause right here for the news, but I don't pay attention to any news. The only thing I know is that the Marvel's Hawkeye show is coming out soon. Do you have any news?
No news, unless you want to call the latest release of the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer, if you want to call that news. It looks fantastic, actually.
It does look fantastic. That shot of MJ, Zendaya, like falling.
Oh, yeah.
Gasp.
I'm not going to say anything, but...
Do you have theories?
No theories. All I do know is, what's that popular meme? If something happens to her, we riot.
That's 100%. I'm pretty sure the prevailing theory I've seen is that the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man will make a cameo to catch her. However, if this is all just a ploy and she actually is injured or, God forbid, killed, Marvel can drop a pin and fight me in real life.
I don't know if I like that Andrew Garfield rumor because we know what happened when he tried to catch someone. It didn't end so well.
Okay, but this time maybe it'll work.
All right, fingers crossed.
all fingers and toes crossed. Well, we will skip the news because Kate is the only one who knows the news, and we will talk about Flash Armageddon Part 1 of, what is it, 5?
Yes.
That's just a lot. That's a really long crossover. But the format of this crossover is kind of different because we're going to really just have a couple crossover characters per episode. They're kind of playing fast and loose with the term crossover. So before we get into it, I want to get a sense of what your rating is. So on a scale from 1 to 5, just for this first episode, what would you rate yesterday's episode?
I'll be interested to hear your rating, but I'm thinking 3.5 to 4, maybe even higher than that. And
Okay.
that's saying something for me.
That is pretty high for you. I would give it a solid 3. It wasn't the plot that brought me in. It wasn't the crossover that brought me in because I don't really watch Legends of Tomorrow, so I haven't seen Ray Palmer since back in the Arrow days. I dabbled a bit in Legends, but not that much. What I did appreciate that brought it up to a 3 was I liked getting to see the pared down cast each get a chance to shine. You could see they really put in some effort to make sure, we saw where Caitlin is, we saw where Iris is, we saw where her reporters are, we see this place that she's managing, we see Cecile, we see, of the cast that they had access to, they really tried to give each one a bit of a storyline, which is a good start for a crossover when crossovers historically have not done a good job of featuring everyone. Chester as well, and him getting to interact with Ray was really nice. So there were so many things that were inexplicably cheesy, hard to follow, etc. Or I guess hard to jump over certain plot holes and stitch things together. But overall, it's kind of like an E for effort kind of 3.
I again, without having watched the past couple of seasons, and so sort of going into it flat-footed, what I really appreciated, like what you said, was everyone had sort of a clear spot or clear space. There was clear narrative and clear sort of definition of what each character brings to the show, what they bring to the team. So I certainly appreciated that a great deal. And I'll be totally honest with you. I don't know how Barry Allen got to this point, but seeing a sort of confident, competent Flash, that's something I hadn't seen since, say, season 2. And so that was the biggest deal for me.
You know what? I will go on a limb and agree with that. I have not seen that progression happen smoothly, and I haven't seen it happen consistently. And honestly, that was not always present even in the latest season. So this is what you're experiencing, and the difference I think we're all experiencing in real time here, because even as late as last season, he was harried, frazzled, immature, popping out babies with the Speed Force, making bad decisions that I wish I was kidding, making bad decisions that, benefit, him and his emotions, but not other people, et cetera, et cetera. So as late as last season, we had that. And now we're seeing this difference, which is interesting because, to address Stormy's question from the chat, she says, let me guess, Barry did something to cause Armageddon. Well, yes. And if you saw any of the prior seasons of Barry, it's like, of course he caused Armageddon. He was either dumb or selfish or both. But in this episode, they've gone to some lengths to make him not appear dumb and selfish.
And I was going to say allegedly. So we haven't seen that yet. And so I guess the interesting part of it all is, like you said, we've seen the narrative, we've seen the story of where Barry is the one that's caused the problem. And the Barry that we see now starting the season, you get the sense of, no, that can't be right, because and so that's actually a sort of a strong narrative to bring about, to say that, no, this can't be the Barry that causes Armageddon. Look at this guy. He looks, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
past Barry, yeah, we get that. the Barry that we see in this premiere, I don't get that, and so it'll be interesting to see how they get to the point where he's starting to question that.
I think, and I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse here and revealing what my opinion is before we even get into our highs and lows, but I'll just let you know up front. I think that this entire crossover is pro-Barry propaganda in order to reset his entire personality. Not actually reset, like not a brain reset of the character where it's like it's explained on scene. But I think this is like a massive PR strategy of like, how do we make Barry Allen look better and look like the leader of, this show and the adjacent shows? We're going to, head on address whether or not he could ever be a villain. We're going to, just completely restart his personality. And we do have a time jump prior to this episode that can kind of explain where this competency comes from. But ultimately, I think this is their way of reintroducing Barry as good.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't know if I saw anything that said like couple months later or what kind of time jump are we talking about?
This episode was set in 2031. I'm trying to remember where we left off, if we were already somewhat in the future beyond 2021, but this is 10 years in advance of present day. And I think that is at least 5 years in advance of where we last saw them.
So yeah, that's sort of because I'll be honest, when it said 2031 on the screen, I thought that was sort of establishing that was basically when Armageddon happens, and then we sort of go back to quote unquote present day that sort of leads to how we got there.
Oh, you know what? You might be right. I know that Armageddon happens 2031. And how much in the future did he say it happens? Was it not that he was going to catch Barry right before it happens?
That's a good question. My thought was that we were as close to present day in terms of where the primary story was taking place, is that we were closer to present day than we were 2031. But again, I don't know if it was incredibly clear how far he went back from 2031 to stop whatever it is, how Armageddon was going to happen. I'm not clear on that.
You know what? Number one, I think you're right because that makes a ton of sense. Number two, I know we had some time jumps, short time jumps across Flash seasons that I think technically were putting us ahead of 2021. But if, let's say, there's anywhere between, 9 to 5 years between where last season of Flash ended and Armageddon starting, this could be taking place anytime in that 9 to 5 year range and may actually be closer to, there's some things I'm trying to reconcile there. On the one hand, Caitlin was referencing Frost still recovering, from being heartbroken from Chilblain, which I found odd because it seemed like that would be something that would happen right after the last season of Flash. But when we see Iris promoting her employee and the extension of the company, that seems like something that would happen at least a couple of years in the future.
Because again, I don't know how well that quote unquote was it Central City Citizen. I don't know how well that was established in the previous season, so I don't know if it was something that was where she was working out of her house and doing it, and all of a sudden she has this empire now, or what.
I think she had just acquired a tiny office space and one employee.
Yeah, and the only reason I was thinking time jump is because obviously based on I did watch the season finale, and so I figured like a natural time jump would have probably been say 6 months or whatever it was, just not 10 years, but I guess we'll find more of that out in the next one.
Well,
again, it also seemed like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, with you having watched Legends, when did Ray leave, and how far would that have been from the version of Ray that we saw present day?
That was fairly recent. He left. It's been in terms of Legends, it was within the last year.
Okay.
So um, that leads me to believe that maybe a few months to a year um, from last season is probably where we are.
Okay. That makes sense.
Because that was all still new to Ray, and that only happened fairly recently.
Okay. That's one of the storylines that I know we're going to see later. It has appeared that he has, stepped aside for now, but later in this crossover, I believe there's a passing of the mantle to Ryan planned.
Right.
That'll be
Which
interesting.
which is only taken. I mean, what was he, a Paragon and the crossover, and then they sort of forgot that he existed. So
It's been
um,
years.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess it's nice to sort of tie those things together. It's just sort of been something that's sort of just been laying out there, and I guess it's nice to bring that back up.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll add him to some show or do like a digital series.
Yeah.
In the chat, Stormy says, I adore Mia Smoke Queen, but even my love has limits. The limit is watching Barry Allen. Since Arrow ended, I freed myself of the CW. So, with Stormy's comment, Carey, I toss it to you to convince her and anyone else listening to watch this crossover by telling us your favorite part of this episode. What was your favorite part?
Well, I've talked a little bit about what some of what my favorite parts of the episode were, and that's obviously having Barry be a competent hero.
Mhm.
Um, but I think and of course it was just sort of like an action sequence, right? But I think the my favorite part was the team up with Adam and the Flash, particularly I forget the guy's name, Despero, whatever his name is.
I keep calling him
But he
Despacito on purpose.
I saw that, which is cool. But when he threw the car at him, and Adam grabbed the Flash and shrunk him, and they went spiraling through the car and came out on the other side. I thought that was an incredible team up, and it is just sort of nice to see the Flash and Adam, who are a lot alike in so many ways. But just to see that good teamwork and the good kinship that they had, it was nice to see that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Barry interacts with the rest of the heroes that join him on this 5 episode journey, particularly Chris Williams. I thought
Yes,
they had a lot of chemistry.
they did, and he was a valuable addition in past crossovers. I know he's showing up next episode too, so we won't have to wait too long.
Yeah. And I think that he will provide sort of the kind of mentorship and leadership that obviously Barry lost with Arrow going.
Yeah.
But I think it's a different kind of mentorship. I think it's more of a and we know how what a curmudgeon Oliver can be, but it was
Hmm.
sort of the kick in the butt that the Flash needs. This is just a sort of a different kind of mentorship, a sort of a more positive one that I think will be interesting to see how it plays out on screen.
I think what's interesting with Jefferson Pierce coming in is that he has a much healthier relationship with his city than Oliver ever did. Oliver always had a really terrible relationship with his city. And in comic book situations, the hero city relationship is central almost in a character to character type of way. And we haven't really seen Barry's relationship to Central City fleshed out that well. It stayed pretty shallow. With Oliver, we saw his relationship to Star City or Starling City fleshed out a bit, but it was always tumultuous. It was always toxic. Even when he was supposedly the mayor, he and the city always had a bad relationship. With Jefferson, while it's not always smooth sailing, it is almost never smooth sailing. He is coming into this city leader relationship with from a much healthier perspective. So when it comes to a conversation like what we're entering here, where Barry's going to have to face the fact that he might be destroying his city, Jefferson is the best person, I think, in this CWDC universe to speak to that like responsibility and relationship.
Yeah. because I think, like you were saying, Black Lightning's relationship with the city always felt organic. It always felt like
Mhm.
certainly he was a product of the city. Barry obviously has been a product of Joe's Joe's raising him, but he hadn't always felt like a product of the city, and
Mhm.
so that'll be interesting to see how they're able to connect that if they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, my favorite moment in this episode, or my favorite part of this episode, was actually our weird finhead villain. And it's not just because he called Barry a villain. And I like seeing myself represented on screen, even if I'm being represented as a villain, whatever, I appreciate that my idea was voiced. Although there is a logical part of my head that knows that the second that they voiced my perspective, which is that Barry's a villain, they will take the next 4 episodes to prove me wrong because they're sick and tired of hearing this from me for the last however many series, but I'm not going to stop. And then what? However, in addition to the fact that he called out Barry as a villain, had some really good lines, you're the worst kind of villain, the scariest kind of villain, whatever, because you're hiding as a hero. I also just liked the combination of powers that he brought. They were cheesy, don't get me wrong. They were a little OP, but this ability of like mental stamina, illusions, seeing through illusions, etc., was very well balanced to what Barry and the Atom brought, which made for great fight scenes, which I normally don't care about. And so even I'm like, oh, this is interesting. They are well matched. He is developing as he fights them. This could go, this could go on, and he's speaking for, the future, an entire other group of people. So I can see how this could bring in more characters. He's not a one-dimensional villain. He's actually not a villain at all, which is good for the Flash because the Flash doesn't kill people. It's just very helpful when they bring on people who aren't actually bad, because the last time Flash actually faced off against a Nazi, he let him go, which is really sketch. So bringing in like only semi-villainous people is about as far as we can go. So overall, it was a well scoped out villain, and his face off against Flash and Atom and his little narrative against Barry at the end were my favorite parts.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's incredibly well said. One thing that sort of intrigued me a little bit was because he said he destroyed our world. And again, not knowing much of anything about who this guy is, was he someone who was essentially from this planet, from Earth? For some reason, he seems like an alien. And then he says, "You destroyed our world." And so that confused me a little bit.
From that, I have to assume that he's an alien. And from that, I have to assume that Barry's destroying more than just his city. He's destroying like a universe or maybe parallel versions of Central City. But we know from the context of it being Armageddon, and they've mentioned in the, blurbs that this is about aliens. We know Alex Danvers is coming in because it's about aliens.
Right.
But this guy's probably an alien, or they've also kind of styled him to appear that way
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this universe. Based on how they've styled aliens on Supergirl, he's kind of in that same vein of thought.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the chat. I see Kate has jumped in to say hi. She says, "Hi everyone, I loved myself too much this week and therefore did not watch. Just wanted to poke my head in and say hello." Hello, Kate. We will miss you this week, but we hope you are off fighting great battles of your own in faraway Narnia.
Kate, you're missing out on. I still say it was a pretty good episode of The Flash, and this is from someone who gave up on it.
It was a pretty good episode, and that was even for the Flash, because it very much came across as a Flash episode. Even especially at the
Right.
very beginning when you had the whole like coffee shop thing, that's very Flash. Him running around to save the city and coming back with oat milk, very Flash. But a little that was one of the first moments that kind of cued to me that this is a little bit more of a mature Barry. The conversation he had with Caitlin at the beginning came across as very mature. Bringing back the oat milk was very much like, okay, this seems like a grown up, right? To that end, Stormy in the chat says, Barry being not dumb and selfish, well, I'm shocked. Are his kids still in the show? I'm guessing maybe they will carry the annoying traits of their dad so he can finally get maturity. That is a good theory, and that is a good question. We didn't see Barry's kids in this episode. What did you think of that?
Well, again, I not knowing much about the last couple seasons, I assume they've gone back to the future, or are they still in our quote unquote present day? Because that I don't know.
For the kids, well, I
Yeah.
believe
When we say the kids, are we talking about Nora and Bart, or are we talking about the quote unquote
the
not the I guess the Force kids? Is that still a thing anymore, or is that pretty much
the
done?
the Speed Force kids are kind of sent off at the end
Okay.
of last season, and I'm trying to recall exactly whether there was any loophole on what was going on with Nora and Bart, but I believe they were also sent away to another dimension end of last season.
Because I thought I remember Barry saying a line, or someone saying a line about having them drop in every now and again, like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So it wasn't
but
like they were
only
just
Nora
always
and
around.
Bart, not just all the
Right,
other Speed
right,
Force
right,
kids.
right. Here's my bigger question though: where the hell was Joe? See,
I was wondering the exact same thing. And I was also wondering if there was something I missed in like the news, because I that's Kate's job. I don't know if there was something announced that he wouldn't, maybe he's not supposed to be in the crossover, or he's just not in the first episode or two, but that was kind of stark.
and no one mentioned him. That was the strangest thing.
Hmm. Not even
Because I'll be
Cecile,
honest,
not even like a throwaway line. Yeah.
yeah, because I'll be honest, I had to sort of Google and check just to make sure that he, quote unquote, spoiler, is still alive, right? I was like,
Yeah.
they didn't kill him off, did they?
Let's see.
And circling back to something, I don't, not trying to take over your show or anything, but
Are you
circling
good?
back to something you mentioned, Barry and Caitlin, why do their interactions, their conversations, always seem so much? They just seem to have so much more charisma, chemistry between those two than, and I'm not one of those people that bash um, Barry and Candace Patton's character. Yeah, her. I'm
Iris.
not. Yeah, there you go. I'm not someone who bashes them, but it's just hard to deny that in the few minutes that Barry spent with Caitlin, they just seem to have a bit more chemistry than I've ever seen between Barry and Iris. And here's another question: they were always sort of having their quote unquote coitus interruptus, right? And I'm just wondering, is that because of COVID and they don't want to like do a lot of kissing? It just seems like there's always something that interrupts them when they're supposed to be getting together. But I watch other shows and there's plenty of kissing, there's plenty of touching. It just doesn't seem to be between Barry and Iris. And I'm just wondering, um, has that sort of been a thing the last couple of seasons?
That has been a thing the last couple seasons. And let me tell you, I watched Riverdale after The Flash, and every other scene was a sex scene. I swear. In one episode, I think there were like 5 or 6 sex scenes, one on a money bed, one in a shower. There was some sort of like naked cultic. Riverdale's gone wild. So this is not the CW trying to do COVID protections or whatever. It could be because they're trying to keep the Flash more family friendly, but honestly, I think it would be more family friendly if they would convince us that Barry and his wife are Barry and his wife. I think there's no accounting for chemistry, and sometimes you just don't know what kind of chemistry you're going to have. And I do think Barry and Iris have chemistry. I think Candace Patton did a fabulous job on this week's episode as Iris. I think she was wonderful, but her character does not come across as like kind of like doe-eyed in love with Barry. She comes across as somebody who's grown up with this guy, beat up people who were beating him up in high school, was sort of the protective big sister. and was not into him. But, like, I don't know. It's just, it's always been weird to me. So yes, I completely agree with you. I think Grant Gustin, probably just by virtue of the types of shows he's been on, he's been on Glee, he's been on whatever, he has done so many scenes where you're supposed to kind of like, I guess, like, generate chemistry, look like you have a crush, whatever. And Danielle Panabaker, likewise, she's an ex-Disney kid. She's done the same thing. Lots of the whole, like, generate crush, like, whatever. The two of them together have fantastic chemistry. He's also had fantastic chemistry with other people on the show. I happen to like Barry and Caitlin because, like, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I was a sucker for Fitzsimmons. I like seeing nerdy people together. That's not the direction this show went. No disrespect to, the current situation. Love it. But you're not wrong. The show does not have romantic chemistry. And it's okay, except for there was the scene where Ray showed up. It was very funny, where he kind of interrupts them when they're supposed to be having this, like, romantic pizza thing, which is already kind of awkward because, like, they didn't have that kind of chemistry, and we all, like, know it. Like, anybody over the age of 21 looks at these two and they're like, no, you're not. You're not about to go upstairs. Stop it. So you already have that. Then Ray comes in with his bags, and it instantly gave me this feeling of, like, have you ever been, like, at somebody's house when the parents are, like, fighting, or when the parents don't like each other? That was more the feeling it got. Like, they didn't seem annoyed that Ray got there. Like, they just seemed like it was, like, that awkward feeling of, like, you walked in on a fight. And that's kind of representative to me of, like, the chemistry is just a little off, so it doesn't give the same, like, romantic vibes. Because if you had, like, interrupted two people that were, like, really into each other, I would expect more, like, these sort of giggling, adjusting the collar, flirty looks, but, like, chagrined, like, okay, what are we gonna do? And that just, like, wasn't the vibe.
Yeah. It to a great degree, it seems like Barry has gotten sort of out of the friend zone with Iris, and it was like, how the hell did that happen, right? And so we're here, and even beyond that, it's like they have kids without actually having to do the work to get those kids. So it just feels like the writers have figured out a way to get around any of that bedroom action, and it's like, hey, they have kids, so they don't even have to do that anymore. So let's not even worry about it.
The writer said, you heard of the Virgin Mary, but can I introduce you to the Virgin Barry?
And it seems to be that's what they're going for. Because
Yeah.
I don't like to compare shows, but again, Sarah and Ava on Legends of Tomorrow have a great relationship, and if they were about to get it on, and some member of their team comes knocking on the door, first of all, the member of the team be like, I'm not going in there because Sarah and Ava in there and I know what's up. So let me get moving back. But if they did, it would be, again, like to your point, a situation where everyone would realize there's some action that was going on here, and so we're interrupting. So let me get out, as opposed to, hey, Ray is here, and it felt like a relief almost to both of them. Like, hey, we can stop now.
We could stop playing house.
Yeah,
It felt like
yeah.
a relief as a viewer, where I'm like, I'm not about to sit and watch these two people eat pizza out of a cardboard box and then go upstairs. No, please don't. I will tell you though, everybody needs to brace themselves, because what I lack in taste in television, I make up for in being frequently right. And let me tell you, with my false sense of confidence, what I am so certain is going to happen in episode 5 of this crossover, possibly end of episode 4. Okay? How you start the crossover is how you're going to end the crossover. They have set up this premise, they have set up this coitus interruptus, if you will, and thus far we've had 0 sex scenes between these two. Thank God. Okay? We are going to have a sex scene between the two of them at the end of the crossover. I've made my peace with it. I invite everybody to make their peace with it. I invite everybody to grab a glass of wine, take some deep breaths, it's going to happen, and it's probably going to be in one of the last 2 episodes, so it's probably going to be in the episodes that Mia Smoke is there, and we could just all be disappointed together.
The only response I can give to that is this. The hope, obviously, is that somehow Iris will get injected with the Speed Force, and whatever happens between those two happens in sort of like really flash time. So it happens and it's over before we have to bear witness to it. That's the only thing that I can hope.
I agree. I think it's always difficult when, like, okay, I will give you a metaphor. I watch a lot of reality TV shows, right? Right? Okay. So now we give the disappointed side eye, but wait, I'm talking about a cooking show. I watch MasterChef, that Gordon Ramsay show, right? Where they do like these tough challenges and like get yelled at by Gordon Ramsay and whatever, and somebody gets eliminated every week. And most of the time, the person who gets eliminated every week is actually, the weakest. But sometimes they let somebody stay on like a couple weeks beyond. And what happens is you end up in this situation. It happened recently in an episode I saw. This guy had been left in. He hadn't been cut. And he was kind of like well out of his league at this point. He was competing against 3 or 4 other people who were just way better. He looked completely dumb in comparison. And, he's trying to get through the challenges. And it was like, you think you're doing something nice by letting him make it this far, but you're actually making him look bad. He would have looked better if you just eliminated him when it was, his ability level to be cut, right? So let's tie this back to Barry and Iris having sex. They have a weakness. Both of them are great. Iris is better than Barry, but both of them are, whatever. The actors are great, but they happen to have a weakness in that they don't have romantic sexual chemistry, right? They may be Emmy worthy in every other area. They're not, but they could be, but that's their weakness. And if you just cut that off and just forever have it be this sort of like family show where it's just sort of the inside joke that you never have a sex scene, they pretty much also never kiss. In last season, they were like oftentimes opposite sides of the rooms at all time. Like it was just, whatever. If you just do that, I think that might make them look better than trying to do a sex scene and trying to make it look good, because I have a feeling it's going to be kind of bad. And that's why I want us all to brace ourselves. I think they're going to be pushed beyond their means.
I can't believe I'm making this comparison, but did you ever watch the show Martin back in like the 90s, I believe it was?
No,
with
but I think
Martin
I've heard
Lawrence
of it.
with Martin Lawrence and Tashina Arnold, those folks.
Let me look it up. Sounds familiar.
And so while you're doing that, the reason I bring that up is because in the last couple of seasons, and I'm not saying this is what's true on The Flash, but in the last couple of seasons, they had the 2 lead actors had friction, right? And so basically it got to the point where they weren't doing scenes together at all. Sort of like what happened with Barry and Iris, I think, in the last season or so, where they were just sort of like not even in the same space at the same time. And again, I'm not saying that it's for the same reason, but it's just something that they sort of had to navigate out of basically the fact that 2 weren't going to be doing scenes or working together. And I think you might be right that I think the writers might have realized that these 2, while they're great actors, don't have that romantic chemistry that sort of you would think 2 leads in a show like this would have. And so they've just figured out ways to write around it. And it's gotten to the point where it's sort of blatantly obvious, sort of like it was in the last season of Martin. But I think that's where we are.
I think that's where we are as well. But anything they set up at the beginning, they're going to capitalize on at the end.
Well, that's interesting also, because, and again, I don't know if this was a reference to what happened last season or sort of foreshadowing to what may happen next. But there was all this discussion, quote, about leveling up, right?
Hmm.
Barry leveling up in terms of the powers and abilities and the command of them that he has now. The same for, and you have to forgive me, I can remember the actress's name, Kayla Compton, but I can't remember her name on the show. Um, but she, quote unquote, leveled up in powers, and she's also leveled up in terms of like the job that she has now. And
Hmm.
there was so much talk about that. So I'm just wondering if that's also something that's going to come into play in terms of what, quote unquote, triggers Barry to start this Armageddon thing. Is it going to be the pursuit of some sort of leveling up that either he or someone does inadvertently that triggers sort of a cascade of things that happen or get set into place? Again, like you said, I don't think that you sort of establish something in the first part of a crossover or something like this without it coming back to pay off. And I think I think it was abundantly clear that leveling up was a theme, and I don't think it's something you bring up for no reason.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that they can't use a cop out explanation of, you know, fish alien guy saying, Barry, you're the villain, you did whatever. They can't use a cop out where it's just like, oh, somebody took over Barry's body, or oh, it's his doppelganger, or oh, he was framed. All of those would be cop outs. They might do it, but I really don't think they are. I think it is going to be that it is Barry in the future who does this, but that there's some sort of motivation or explanation for why he does this corrupt thing, or why he allows this sort of spiral of dark power, while he may presently be quote unquote good. And by presently, I mean in this specific episode, barring all of his past situations. This will be sort of this examination of what would make Barry spiral into madness and then stopping that before it starts. Explanations may be pursuit of power, protection of a child or loss of a child, some sort of thing where he prioritizes his family over the world. And all of those would be in character because as early as season 1, he did prioritize his own. It wasn't even his family, it was his own, emotional and mental wants, being able to see his mom over not just the world, but also his present family, the Wests, Eddie, the city, etc. So if they're keeping with the same sort of character trait, that's probably what it is, where he prioritizes himself, maybe him and Iris, maybe him and the immediate team over the world.
And that makes a lot of sense. What I suspect, though, is since they've gone to great lengths to sort of establish how, quote unquote, much better Barry is in terms of commanding his abilities and also his sort of his experience and his perspective, I have to hope that whatever it is that sort of leads to this Armageddon is two things. First of all, it needs to be something that is organic, not something that's like a light switch. I think that would be more effective. And I think it needs to be something that he hasn't had to address before. Because again, if it's something that he's already dealt with before that triggers this or pushes him along that path, I think that would be a mistake. So I would hope that it would be something that's new and truly a test, as opposed to something that's a retread of something that we have seen before.
Yeah, like a test that he fails.
Right. Um, because it almost felt like, and I know that it almost felt like we're going to see sort of the trials of Barry Allen, right?
Hmm.
Because again, it's like you tell someone, "Hey, I didn't do this," and then they say, "Well, you have to prove it," right? So how do
Hmm.
you prove that you're a good person or a good
Hmm.
guy? It's like it's really difficult to prove unless you were sort of tested by something that you haven't been tested by before. And that would make a lot of sense for the Barry that we see now. It would be sort of be depressing if he's tripped up by something that either he's sort of hurdled before already or defeated already, or if it's not something that's worthy of who he's supposed to be now.
Hmm. Which makes sense that next week he's going to go to Black Lightning. He's going to go to Jefferson Pierce. Because when it comes to who's given him character advice, like character moral advice, and who he would look to as sort of somebody who knows their character into like later into adulthood. Barry is still a
Right.
fairly young adult, so one of the older adults in his life who is a hero and who can speak to their own character and who could either speak to his or test his, that seems like the obvious choice.
Oh,
Of the other
absolutely.
remaining heroes other than Ray, there's not many around that could even come close to that role.
Right. Because I think it's like you said from the very beginning. I mean, other than obviously Superman and Lois, Barry is carrying the mantle of the quote unquote Arrowverse. And so, um, yeah, if there was anyone that he's going to be able to go to and trust, and it's Black Lightning, it essentially can't be anyone else, unless it was perhaps Diggle, but it still wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. With
Unless, of course,
Diggle,
Diggle was Green Lantern, but that's another story.
had they given Diggle a Green Lantern, she would be different. At this point, if you're looking for somebody who has led protection on a city and who can speak to that, again, it comes down to it comes down to Jefferson Pierce. I'm trying to think of whether I know that Superman and Lois aren't crossing over, but I'm trying to think to whether that would even be another option. And it's really not
Because
because
they don't have
Clark
that
doesn't have
connection.
that relationship with Smallville at
Right,
this point.
right. And
Yeah,
neither and he and Barry don't have that connection. So
also true.
it certainly Black Lightning makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
The I guess the question I have is I would imagine sort of looking out at the next handful of episodes, there's probably going to be an episode where we quote unquote have all these folks in the same show. I mean, obviously we're sort of getting them piecemeal, which I sort of appreciate, gives them room to breathe. But there's
Hmm.
got to be that sort of like end game moment that I'm assuming they're not going to wait until like part 5. It probably will start happening around the end of 3, I suspect.
Yeah. I think the order, if I've pieced things together from the spoilers, is Adam pops up first this episode, as we saw, exits. We're going to see Jefferson Pierce brought in. We're going to see Alex Danvers brought in shortly thereafter. We're going to see current Batwoman brought in, and it has been strongly insinuated she's going to fight Barry. So at the point that she's brought in, I imagine he's later on in whatever mental test he's going through. It will also be the first time she meets him. And Mia is brought in towards the end. It's mentioned that Mia has some scenes with Iris, given the fact that they're putting Iris on a journey of like being ready to have kids. Having her interact with another hero's child kind of makes sense. So I think Mia's mostly brought in to further Iris's story, and as well as to fight. But I think at the point that Mia comes in is when everything's going to hit its emotional climax and when everything's snowballed. And I think Ray and Ryan are going to also rejoin at that time. So the gang is kind of all here.
Hmm. Um, yeah, that certainly makes a lot of narrative sense. Um, yeah, it certainly does. And strangely enough, I'm incredibly interested to watch it.
I am too. And also my predictions might be wrong because I have a habit of saying things with like a really strong, like false sense of confidence. And it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. And it's like I read 2 lines of an article one time. So with that being said, we've talked about what we kind of want to see going forward. So I will ask you, which hero are you most excited to see join the gang for Armageddon?
Um, based on what you just said about Batwoman, I'm interested to see how she gets integrated into all this because it's not only would she be sort of coming here essentially for the first time because I don't does she have no that Ryan doesn't have any connection to anyone in the Arrowverse, so I think that would be totally out of left field.
Yeah,
And so because again, everyone else you sort of they have a connection to, I think that would be a curveball.
yeah,
So yeah, that will probably be number one who I'm most looking forward to seeing. Um, and then second would probably be Alex, because it'll be interesting to see where in time she will be joining this show in comparison to where the Supergirl finale left off.
yeah.
And obviously it sounds like it's right after because I think they mentioned that she's heading up to DEO, and I think that's
Hmm.
where we left.
Which
A
means
new and
she's going to be
improved
really
DEO,
useful in that whole alien thing.
right?
I will say there by Alex coming in kind of opens up a teeny weeny plot hole in that her daughter can fix all of these problems at any time because she's the most OP character in this entire universe, but we'll let it slide.
Well, interesting you should mention that. And again, I forget the character's name, the police captain now, right? She has mimic abilities as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good
And so
point.
she has and it was interesting the conversation. I know I'm jumping around here a little bit, but she had a conversation with Barry when he was working as a CSI, which was good to see because I hadn't seen him actually do real work for a while. Um, but they obviously had the conversation about the fact that she can mimic a Meta's abilities, and of course, the first thought I had was she's obviously when she's going to be in a stress situation, she's going to mimic the Flash's ability somehow, and
Yeah.
then obviously we're going to get triggered to know that. I mean, everyone else knows that he's Barry Allen. I mean, by now, but it means that she will. And I don't know how long that ability or that power might last, but it might be something that she does while mimicking the Flash that somehow helps trigger this Armageddon somehow.
Yeah. She'll be a useful one to kind of pull into this, I think, because, mimicry is incredibly OP, which is fun
Yeah.
to see, but from a plot perspective, that's that's that is the max power you can have because they can imitate the max power there, particularly if you can mimic multiple people, so on. And therefore she will find out about Barry. But I think it's cool.
Strangely enough, right? I mean, Barry, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? But Barry, out of all these folks that are going to be a part of Armageddon, is the only one that has meta abilities, right? Um,
Let's see.
Mia doesn't, obviously. Alex doesn't. Ryan Choi doesn't. Ray doesn't. Black Lightning does. Okay, Black
Right.
Lightning does.
And then we
So
also
and
have Damien Dark is apparently going to be on it. He's not going to be part of the hero team, but doesn't he have some kind of meta ability that he acquired at some point?
yeah, which leads to a whole nother question of which Damon Dark are we getting?
Right.
But I bring all that up to say that obviously we're getting Armageddon. You'd think he'd bring in folks with more firepower, right? But I think it actually makes it interesting because one of the things that I have not always liked about Supergirl is that they have made everyone a quote unquote meta or a superhero, which takes away from the specialness of Supergirl.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how they integrate what each of these characters bring, um, minus meta abilities. So I think
Just
it's an
because with
interesting.
Supergirl, they have never been invested in having Supergirl shine at every turn, for better for worse. They have either, and it's kind of from both sides. There's been moments where they've stopped her from shining, and I want to fight them because I'm like, you're, just trying to boost some male character, or you're just trying to boost some spinoff or whatever. And then there's times where they've held back her shine where it's like, it's almost well meaning. It's like they do have a really valuable, important character to explore, but in order to make that character shine, they're kind of dampening Supergirl's power, and that was always frustrating. But if you contrast that with Barry, they go to great lengths to make sure Barry shines. And what you've just pointed out, which I hadn't noticed, but is a really good observation, is a good example. They're not bringing in anybody powerful for this. They're bringing in every non-meta, with the exception of Black Lightning, who they're bringing in early on, and it sounds like it's mostly for discussion, like guidance type of scenes.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I want to take a pause here and give you the chance to tell us what else, if anything, you watched or read this week that we should be watching or reading.
Well, I have not watched it yet, but as soon as I get off here, I will be watching the most recent episode of Legends of Tomorrow. And if you have not been watching this season, if you have given up on the show, sort of like I gave up on The Flash, here is an open invitation to come back. The writing this season has been incredible. The stakes that our heroes are dealing with are fantastic. Um, and obviously, any sort of cast that's been around for 6 or 7 years has incredible chemistry. Um, and it's just strange to me because I'm assuming these are all the same writers, but the stuff that they're doing this season makes you wonder, why did we get such bad stuff before? It hadn't all been bad, but I'm just saying this season, um, season 2 of Legends of Tomorrow has always been considered one of the best ones. The writing, the acting in this season is rivaling that.
Really?
There hasn't been a bad episode yet. And so if you are on the fence about Legends of Tomorrow, I highly recommend that you give it another shot.
I gotta say, it is a huge positive for a show to go out on a strength. And I don't know how close Legends is to wrapping, but to wrap on a strong season, or to have a strong season be one of your final seasons, is huge.
Certainly. And actually, that's one of the things we've been thinking about when we talk about it. Is that the assumption is, hey, there's going to be another season, but I'll be honest, what they've done with this season is like they basically said, if this is going to be our last, and no one's announced that yet, but they're like, if this is going to be our last, let's do what we're going to do and go out on a high note. And so that's really nice to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. I may have to dabble back into the Legends verse and watch their current season. But first, we got to get through Armageddon. And we will be taking a break next week since it's the night before Thanksgiving. I'm sure everybody will be, stuffing a tofu turkey just like me, right? Maybe not tofu. So the following week, which will be December 1st, is a Wednesday, we'll be back and we will have episodes 2 and 3 of the crossover to discuss. And I will admit, I'm a little excited. And if I can bribe, beg, and steal Carey away from Legends that night to come on here and chat about episodes 2 and 3 of the crossover, I will absolutely be doing it.
That's a good possibility, only if you let me plug the fact that I totally forgot about. If you are interested in watching Legends of Tomorrow, please go to Facebook and find Tomorrow's Legends on Facebook and follow along with us. Jess, Martin, and Jeff are incredible leaders of that page, and obviously have feedback opportunities and run an incredible podcast. So the more the merrier. Come on.
I will put that in the description down below. Will do. And I also have Carey's information already linked in the description down below. So if anybody's watching this after the fact and wants to chat about Flash Crossover or Legends Tomorrow, you can find Carey in the description down below. With that, Carey, any final words before we head off into the ether for 2 weeks?
Final words. I suspect and hope we're going to get Joe West, because I'd like to see Joe West and Black Lightning and Barry in a scene together. Come on, give us that. Um, but that's about it. I just look forward to seeing the rest of this Flash, and I can't believe I'm saying that.
I can't believe I'm saying it too, but I'm very excited. Well, thank you, Carey, for joining me. Everybody go find Carey's stuff in the description down below, and I will hopefully see you in 2 weeks after the American Thanksgiving holidays to chat about over half of this crossover. Crazy.